In 1943, a grandmother in Calabria fed 11 people with a pot of water, stale bread, and a handful of wild greens she picked from the roadside. No meat, no stock, just technique that turned nothing into something that kept a family alive. Number 14 on this list was so effective at stretching ingredients that Mussolini's government actually promoted it during wartime food campaigns. And number 3 uses a method so simple that modern Italian chefs have started putting it back on tasting menus at $40 a bowl. These 25 soups are the engineering behind Italian survival. Not the pasta, not the pizza, the soup. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because what you are about to learn will change the way you think about what belongs in a pot. Number 25. Acqua cotta. The name means cooked water, and that tells you everything about where this soup came from. Shepherds and charcoal burners in the Maremma marshlands of Tuscany had nothing. No kitchen, no pantry, just a fire and whatever they could forage. They boiled water in a blackened pot, tossed in wild herbs, stale bread, maybe an onion, and cracked an egg on top at the very end. That egg poached gently in the broth, turning a bowl of hot water into something that sustained a man through 12 hours of walking. The bread disintegrated into the liquid, thickening it into a porridge that stuck to your ribs. By the 1950s, acqua cotta had dozens of versions across southern Tuscany. Some added tomatoes, others used mushrooms foraged from chestnut forests. But the original was water, bread, and desperation. A whole family ate from one pot. The flavor came entirely from technique, from knowing exactly when to add each element so the bread did not turn to paste and the egg stayed soft. Number 24. Minestra maritata. Maritata means married, because the greens and the meat are paired together in the pot. Families in Campania built this soup around whatever pork scraps the family had: skin, ears, trotters, and a chunk of sausage if they were lucky. Into that broth went every bitter green the garden produced: escarole, chicory, cabbage, sometimes 7 varieties in a single pot. The bitterness of the greens cut through the richness of the pork fat, creating a balance no single ingredient could achieve. A family of 8 ate for 2 days from one batch. In Naples, butchers sold bags of pork scraps specifically for this soup. They called them the marriage kit. The whole transaction cost pennies. Italian Americans brought this tradition to New York and Philadelphia, where it became known as Italian wedding soup. But the American version with tiny meatballs and clear broth is a distant cousin. The real minestra maritata was thick enough to hold a spoon upright and strong enough to fuel a laborer through a 12-hour day. Number 23. Papa al pomodoro, Tuscan bread soup. Stale bread was never wasted in an Italian kitchen. Never. Tuscan housewives tore day-old bread into rough chunks, simmered it in tomato sauce with garlic and basil, and stirred until the bread dissolved into something between soup and stew. The result was silky, rich, tasting of pure concentrated tomato. A loaf of unsalted Tuscan bread cost a few lire, and it lasted 3 days before going hard. Rather than throw it away, mothers soaked it back to life. One pot fed the whole family. Children ate it warm for supper. Fathers took it cold to the fields the next morning. No meat, no stock, just bread, tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, and the refusal to let anything go to waste. Number 22. Zuppa di farro. Farro is an ancient grain that the Romans fed to their legions. By the 20th century, it had become peasant food in the mountains of Garfagnana, a remote valley in northern Tuscany where wheat would not grow well. Housewives simmered the tough, chewy grain with beans, a ham bone, and whatever vegetables were available. The farro never turned mushy. It held its texture for hours, giving the soup a nutty bite that made every spoonful feel substantial. 1 pound of dried farro cost almost nothing and tripled in volume when cooked. A Parmesan rind tossed in during the last hour melted slowly, releasing salty, umami richness that made simple ingredients taste complex. Mountain families ate this 3 or 4 times a week during winter. Number 21. Minestrone di verdure. Everyone thinks they know minestrone, but the original bears no resemblance to the canned version sitting on your grocery shelf. Real minestrone had no fixed recipe. It was whatever the garden produced that week, simmered with beans and pasta or rice until thick enough to serve as a full meal. The only rule was nothing got thrown away. Potato peels went in, carrot tops went in. The tough outer leaves of cabbage that most people discarded went straight into the pot. A Parmesan rind and a drizzle of olive oil at the end turned scraps into something extraordinary. By the 1930s, minestrone was the most frequently eaten meal in rural Italy. Not pasta, not bread, but soup, because soup stretched everything further. 1 onion flavored a gallon of liquid. A single carrot sweetened the whole pot. Number 20. Ribollita. The word means reboiled, and that is exactly what it is. Tuscan families made a big pot of bread and vegetable soup one day, then reboiled the leftovers the next, adding more stale bread each time until the soup became so thick you could stand a ladle in it. Cavolo nero, the dark Tuscan kale, was the essential green. Its sturdy leaves held up to repeated cooking, turning silky and sweet rather than dissolving. Cannellini beans provided body. Stale bread provided structure. Each reheating concentrated the flavors further. By the 3rd day, the bread had merged with the broth into a single, creamy mass. The beans had partially dissolved, thickening everything. This was not reheated leftovers. This was a soup that required time to reach its full potential. The idea of cooking something once and eating it fresh would have seemed wasteful to the women who invented this dish. Stracciatella. Roman mothers could produce a hot, nourishing soup in less than 10 minutes with nothing but broth, eggs, and a handful of Parmesan. They brought good meat broth to a rolling boil, then whisked together eggs, grated cheese, and a pinch of nutmeg, and poured the mixture into the pot in a thin stream. The egg set instantly in the hot liquid, forming ragged ribbons and delicate shreds that floated through the broth like clouds. Stracciatella means little rags, named for those torn wisps of egg. A family could make 4 servings from 2 eggs and whatever broth was left from the day before. Sick children got stracciatella. New mothers got stracciatella. Hospital kitchens across Lazio served it to patients well into the 1970s. It was medicine dressed up as comfort food. Number 18. Zuppa di ceci. Chickpeas were the protein of the poor across southern Italy. Dried, they lasted for years in the pantry. Soaked overnight and simmered with rosemary, garlic, and a drizzle of olive oil, they produced a soup so creamy and satisfying that meat was unnecessary. The cooking liquid itself turned thick and starchy from the chickpeas, creating a natural broth that needed no bones. Some women crushed half the beans against the side of the pot, releasing starch to make it richer, while leaving the other half whole for texture. A heel of stale bread rubbed with garlic and toasted over the fire became the perfect accompaniment. 1 pound of dried chickpeas cost next to nothing and fed a family of 8. First pattern break. Here is where things get personal. Italian grandmothers did not follow recipes. They followed instinct, built on decades of watching, tasting, and adjusting. Every single one of these dishes was invented by women who had to feed families with whatever they could find, not what they wanted, what they had. That constraint produced some of the most sophisticated cooking techniques in history. Letting stale bread dissolve to thicken a broth is not desperation. It is engineering. Cracking an egg into boiling liquid at the exact right moment to create silky ribbons requires precision that culinary students spend weeks learning. These women did it every night without thinking about it because their children were hungry, and there was no plan B. Number 17. Minestra di pasta e patate. Naples gave the world this soup, and it is criminal that the world forgot it. Pasta and potatoes simmered together in a pot until the potatoes broke down, and the pasta absorbed so much starchy liquid that every noodle was coated in a creamy, velvety sauce. The secret was using mixed pasta, broken spaghetti, leftover penne, random elbows, whatever was sitting in the bottom of 3 different boxes. Neapolitan mothers called this pasta mista, and every corner store sold it cheap. Combined with cubed potatoes, a sofrito of onion and celery, and a Parmesan rind, the starch from the potatoes and the pasta merged into something that tasted like it had cream in it. It did not. Just starch, water, and patience. Children fought over the thickest spoonfuls from the bottom of the pot, where potato and pasta had fused into something almost like a savory pudding. Number 16. Zuppa Pavese. Legend says this soup was invented on the battlefield. In 1525, after the Battle of Pavia, King Francis I of France was captured, and a local peasant woman had to feed the defeated king with whatever she had on hand. She toasted bread, laid it in a bowl, cracked a raw egg on top, and poured boiling broth over everything. The egg poached in the broth, and the bread soaked up the liquid. A king ate a peasant's meal and reportedly asked for a second bowl. Whether the story is true or not, the technique fed families across Lombardy for centuries. 3 cheap ingredients, perfect technique, a meal in 5 minutes. Number 15. Zuppa di fagioli. White bean soup was the backbone of the Tuscan diet for so long that other Italians called Tuscans mangiafagioli, bean eaters, and meant it as an insult. Tuscans wore it as a badge of honor. Dried cannellini beans simmered for hours with sage, garlic, and olive oil until the broth turned thick and milky from dissolved starch. Some families passed half the soup through a food mill, creating a creamy base, then stirred the remaining whole beans back in for texture. A drizzle of raw olive oil on top and a grinding of black pepper was all it needed. Meat never entered the equation. Number 14. Pancotto, cooked bread. That is all this is. Stale bread boiled in water with garlic, olive oil, and whatever greens were available. In Puglia, they used wild chicory or turnip tops. In Basilicata, they added dried peppers. The fascist government promoted pancotto during World War II as a patriotic meal, encouraging families to stretch their rations by turning every scrap of bread into soup. Propaganda posters showed smiling mothers serving steaming bowls to grateful children. The reality was grimmer. Families were starving, and pancotto was survival, not choice. But the technique was sound. Bread boiled in seasoned water created a filling, warm meal from literally nothing. The garlic and olive oil transformed plain boiled bread into something that actually tasted good. A family of 6 could eat on a single loaf of stale bread and a pot of water. That is not poverty cooking. That is engineering under extreme constraint. Second pattern break. Here is what the food industry does not want you to understand about these soups. Every single one costs less than $2 to make in a modern American kitchen. Dried beans, stale bread, a few vegetables, an egg, some Parmesan rinds that the cheese counter will give you for free if you ask nicely. These soups were designed to feed families of 8 on a laborer's wage. Meanwhile, a can of soup at the grocery store costs $3 and contains more sodium than a family in the 1940s in Calabria consumed in a week. We did not upgrade. We downgraded. We traded wisdom for convenience and flavor for shelf stability. Number 13. Zuppa di pesce. Fishermen's wives along every Italian coast made this soup from whatever the boats brought in that could not be sold. The ugly fish, the broken fish, the small fish that nobody at the market wanted. They simmered them whole in a tomato broth with garlic, white wine, and a pinch of red pepper. The bones dissolved into the liquid, adding richness and body. In Livorno, they called it caciucco and used at least 5 types of fish. Served over toasted bread rubbed with garlic, A single pot fed the entire fishing family and anyone else who wandered in from the docks hungry. These women were the original zero-waste cooks. Number 12. Passatelli. In Emilia-Romagna, mothers pressed a dough of breadcrumbs, parmesan, eggs, lemon zest, and nutmeg through a special tool with large holes directly into simmering broth. The dough hit the hot liquid and set into short, thick noodles that were impossibly rich and fragrant. Every strand carried the flavor of aged cheese and citrus. Passatelli existed only in the bowl. You could not buy them dried. You could not store them. They were made fresh at the moment of cooking and eaten immediately. That is why they vanished from most kitchens. The technique required a specific press that most families no longer own. Number 11. Ginestrata. This golden soup from Tuscany has almost completely vanished. Egg yolks were whisked with Marsala wine, nutmeg, cinnamon, and a pinch of sugar, then gently heated in warm broth until the mixture thickened into a silky custard. It was served to new mothers, to the sick, and at wedding banquets. The color was a deep, vivid gold from the egg yolks. Farm wives still made it after childbirth because it was believed to restore strength. The eggs provided protein. The wine provided warmth. The spices were believed to stimulate recovery. Whether or not the medicine worked, the soup itself was extraordinary, rich, complex, and unlike anything else in Italian cooking. Number 10. Zuppa di castagni. In the mountain villages of the Apennines, where wheat could not grow and poverty was permanent, chestnuts replaced grain as the primary source of calories. Families gathered them by the sackful each autumn, dried them, and simmered them whole in soups. Chestnuts were boiled in water or in milk with a pinch of salt until they broke down into a sweet, starchy porridge. Some families added dried porcini mushrooms for depth. Children grew up eating it every day from October through March. A single chestnut tree could produce enough nuts to feed a family for an entire winter. The trees were so valuable that inheritance laws in mountain villages specifically divided chestnut trees among heirs. Losing your trees meant losing your food supply. Number 9. Zuppa di cipolle. Onion soup is claimed by the French, but Italian versions are older. Families across northern Italy caramelized onions slowly in butter or olive oil until they collapsed into a sweet golden mass. They then added broth and simmered until the soup became thick with melted onion. The Italian version skipped the heavy cheese crust that defines French onion soup. Instead, toasted bread went into the bottom of the bowl. The soup was ladled over, and a dusting of Parmesan finished the dish. The result was lighter, more focused on the sweetness of the onion itself. 5 pounds of onions cost almost nothing. Simmered slowly, the natural sugars did all the work. Children who would never eat a raw onion devoured this soup because the long cooking erased every trace of sharpness. Number 8. Minestra di riso e prezzemolo. Rice and parsley soup was the emergency meal of the Veneto. When a mother had nothing planned and hungry children were already at the table, she could produce this in 15 minutes. Rice simmered in broth with a generous handful of chopped parsley, and a beaten egg stirred in at the end. The rice swelled, absorbing flavor and thickening the liquid. The parsley added freshness. The egg added protein. 3 ingredients from the most basic Italian pantry produced a complete meal. This was the soup that got made on the nights nobody talks about. Not the Sunday feasts, not the holiday celebrations. The Tuesday evenings when the money was low, the pantry was bare, and children still needed to eat. Third, a pattern break. Almost none of these soups require refrigeration. Dried beans, stale bread, chestnuts, preserved pork, Parmesan rinds, eggs from the morning's collection. These women were cooking without refrigerators, without grocery stores, without supply chains. They were cooking with a pantry of dried goods, a garden of seasonal vegetables, and the knowledge of exactly how to turn those ingredients into meals. Every technique on this list is a solution to a specific problem. No meat? Use beans and bread. No fresh vegetables? Dried herbs and Parmesan rinds. No time. Crack an egg into broth and serve in 5 minutes. These were not recipes. They were survival systems. Number 7. Zuppa di lenticchie. Lentils held a sacred place in the Italian kitchen. Eaten on New Year's Eve for luck, they represented coins, and every spoonful was supposed to bring prosperity. But for poor families in Umbria and Abruzzo, lentil soup was not a once-a-year celebration. It was a twice-a-week necessity. The tiny lentils from Castelluccio cooked in about 30 minutes without soaking. Simmered with garlic, tomato, and olive oil, they produced a thick, earthy soup packed with protein and iron. 1 pound fed a family of 8. Mothers served it over toasted bread, stretching the pot even further. The leftovers thickened overnight, becoming even more concentrated the next day. Number 6. Brodo di gallina. When the old hen stopped laying eggs, she went into the pot. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. A spent-laying hen produced the richest, most flavorful broth in all of Italian cooking. Farm wives simmered the whole bird with celery, carrot, onion, and parsley stems for 3 to 4 hours. The tough meat broke down slowly, releasing collagen and fat until the broth turned golden and thick enough to coat a spoon. The meat was served separately. The broth became the base for tortellini at Christmas, stracciatella on sick days, and pastina before bed. One hen produced enough for 3 or 4 different meals across a week. Even the feet went in for extra gelatin. This was the master broth of the Italian kitchen. Number 5. Mille-cosetti, 1,000 little things. That is what this Calabrian soup was called, because it contained every dried legume and grain in the pantry. Chickpeas, lentils, white beans, farro, barley, and whatever broken pasta was left in the box all simmered together in a broth flavored with tomato, onion, and pork rind. Every spoonful tasted different. One bite was creamy with dissolved beans. The next was chewy with whole farro. The next was slippery with pasta. Calabrian families made this to clean out the pantry before the new harvest. Every jar got tipped into the pot. A single pot fed 12 people. The ultimate expression of the Italian principle that waste is the only sin in the kitchen. Number 4. Zuppa di pane e cavolo. Bread and cabbage soup from the Italian Alpes. Families in the Aosta Valley and Trentino layered slices of stale dark bread with shredded cabbage and fontina cheese in a heavy pot, poured broth over everything, and baked it until the cheese melted and the bread absorbed every drop. The result was closer to a savory bread pudding than a traditional soup. Dense, filling, and intensely warming on nights when temperatures dropped below 0. Cabbage grew in every garden. Bread dried rock hard by midweek. Fontina came from the family cow. 3 ingredients that cost almost nothing combined into a meal that could keep a farmer working through a day of hauling wood in deep snow. Number 3. Garmuggia. This springtime soup from Lucca was so tied to the season that it could only be made during a 2-week window when fresh fava beans, artichokes, asparagus, and peas were all available at the same time. Families simmered these tender vegetables in a light broth with pancetta and olive oil. The flavors were delicate, green, and impossibly fresh. Nothing was overcooked. Making garmuggia required knowing exactly when each vegetable reached its peak and having access to all of them at once. It was a soup that celebrated abundance after a long winter of dried beans and stale bread. Modern Italian chefs have rediscovered garmuggia and now serve it in fine dining restaurants. A soup invented by peasant women who grew their own vegetables, served on white tablecloths for $40 a bowl. Number 2. Caciucco. In Livorno, the rule was 5 types of fish, minimum. Breaking it meant your caciucco was not real. Scorpion fish, eel, cuttlefish, octopus, red mullet, whatever the boats brought in, simmered in a fiery tomato broth loaded with garlic and red pepper. The soup cooked for hours. tougher fish going in first, and delicate ones added at the end, so nothing was overdone. Served over thick slices of garlic rub toast, cachuco turned the scraps of the sea into a feast. Every fishing family had its own version. Recipes were guarded and argued over at the docks with the seriousness of a legal contract. They are not being nostalgic. They are dead serious. Number 1. Ribollita della Nonna. Not the restaurant version, not the cookbook version. The real ribollita that a grandmother made on Monday from Sunday's leftover minestrone, layered with torn, stale bread and cavolo nero, baked in the oven until the top crusted and the inside turned into a dense, creamy, almost cake-like mass of bread, bean, and vegetable. This was not soup anymore. This was architecture. Every layer served a purpose. The bread absorbed moisture and held the structure. The beans dissolved partially into a creamy mortar. The kale wove through everything like dark green ribbons, and the crust on top, golden and cracking, held it all together. A grandmother's ribollita fed 10 people from leftovers and stale bread. It cost nothing to make because everything in it had already been paid for and was about to be thrown away. This is the soup that defines Italian cooking more than any plate of pasta ever could. The refusal to waste, the faith that time and heat can transform anything, and the knowledge that feeding a family is not about expensive ingredients. It is about knowing what to do with what you have. Try one of these this week: the bean soup, the bread soup, or the egg dropped into boiling broth. Then tell me if that can of soup in your pantry was worth $3. Share which one you are going to try in the comments.